Hi, I'm Erin Elliott, an admin to the Bashar Channeled by Daryl Anka Facebook group, an unofficial Bashar group. I'm doing member highlights, interviews, and conversations with different members of the group. And I have with me today a member named Angela Rose Young, and we're going to talk about conscious parenting and how she has applied Bashar's teachings about parenting and education to how she is a mom, and I may share as well some of my experiences with this. So first of all, I'm going to read, I paraphrase the three main concepts that Bashar has shared about how to raise a child that will turn out to be a mature, balanced adult. Number one, as the adult, have the imagination to create safe spaces in which the children can learn consequences to their choices, rather than having to learn this in the world. Number two, teach them that they are as powerful as they need to be to create whatever they need in life without having to hurt themselves or others. Number three, any lesson you believe is important for them to learn, adapt the lesson to their passion. Don't diminish their passion into the lesson.
Yeah. Yes. All of those three things resonate so strongly. And I think for the sake of conversation, maybe we could start with the first one. And that was creating safe space for children to learn the consequences of their actions without having to actually go out into the world and learn them in ways that are possibly a little too harsh for the kids. So, in conscious parenting, specifically the education style that I have chosen as a parent is called unschooling. And if you're not familiar with what unschooling is, it's basically allowing the child to lead their education based on their passions. So it's really child-led. And a lot of the concepts with this are you do create in your home. You give the space for natural lessons to occur rather than like imposing too much of your own, let's say, curriculum or belief systems onto the child. Your role becomes more of one who is curious or one who is an observer and a watcher, and you wait for life's natural lessons to appear, which they no doubt will, and then you become in tune with that and you sort of flow with those lessons and you use those lessons. They bring up so many opportunities for learning. And if we are in the vibration of acceptance of these rather than resistance, then we'll actually be the correct channel to know what the lesson is trying to teach our child for the most part. And this has a lot to do with being in tune with our own higher self and also the higher self of our child. So rather than just perhaps overexposing them and letting life be too harsh on them, if we create a safe space within our home or within a school environment, these lessons naturally appear. It's really quite beautiful to witness.
Yeah, could you share a lesson that you can remember that your children have gone through? I was thinking that one of the challenges might be if it's child-led and if you have more than one child, just harmonizing the different excitements of different children. If you have one child that wants to do one thing and then another child that wants to do another, that there could be different challenges involving relationships. Does anything come to mind that you could share?
Yeah. Let me think. I have 3 children, and this is something that I think is core to the learning of a child, is learning that we do live in a shared world. So I think what you speak of there is they all have excitements towards, and passions towards different things, and we might not all want to do the same thing at the same time. And this is, from a certain perspective of parenting, we could view this as frustrating, right? We're like, oh, the kids are fighting, and why can't we just all get along? Why can't we just all agree? But from a slightly different perspective, we can see how this is one of those learning opportunities that we were talking about. What's calling to be learned here, what's bubbling up from underneath the surface in the form of potentially a disagreement, is actually a child wanting to learn that we live in a shared world and that we do have these strong desires. However, everyone has these strong desires, and therefore how do we learn to manifest without harming others or without robbing anyone else of their freedom. So in terms of a practical application of this, is I'm a huge fan of the family meeting. So in our house, when there are big disagreements, then we know it's time for a family meeting, and we can sit down and we can talk in a sort of democratic way, I guess. Maybe vote, maybe discuss, is there an urgent desire, something that needs to be done right now, or something that can wait till later. We can use our creativity here, but drawing everybody in to problem solve with us really allows the child to learn what's calling to be learned, rather than feel like there's an authority over them forcing them to do something. It's having them really instill these lessons.
Do they tend to like the family meetings, or is it different every time?
Yeah, I would say that it's different every time. For the most part, they like family meetings because the energy of the family meeting that we put on is that everyone does have a say. Everyone's needs and wants are heard. So to them, it's their freedom. It's their way of getting what they want. So for the most part, they're pretty excited about a family meeting. I have to admit that sometimes I have my own agendas. I'm not perfect as a parent either. And sometimes I really want something and I'm like, family meeting time, we got to discuss this. And that's usually when the kids run the other way. And then I have to go internally and be like, well, wait a minute. Was I coming from a pure perspective, or was I really at that point sort of exercising my authority? And so it's learning for both the child and the parent, for sure.
Yeah. That's
I wonder if I could think of an actual example of, okay, I do know an example. Because so many parents have kids home from school right now, most likely you're on quarantine and your kids are there. So a lot of people are trying to incorporate curriculum-based education into their home. And what happens now is the parents are actually the safe space for the child to express what they feel. So maybe at school they didn't show so much resistance to wanting to learn something, but at home with a parent, now they're like, I don't want to do this, and putting up a little bit of a fight. And it's the same thing that we talked about earlier, where from a certain perspective, this looks like an issue, like a problem, like, oh man, why is this happening? But from another perspective, this is actually what your child is calling to learn. And it could be two things. It could be many things, but I think the two main things here is, number one, this is absolutely not relevant for the child, and there's nothing passionate about it in their energy field. It's not the time for this. Number two, they actually are interested, but they're experiencing a block. And in order to get to what they want, they're sort of afraid of some challenge or pushing themselves beyond the limit. And it's our job as parents to be very in tune with the child's true self, so that we can tell the difference between these two challenges. And now all of a sudden, what was appearing before as seemingly like something negative is a huge opportunity to find out either, number one, what the child really wants, or to help them learn how to deal with challenges.
It makes a lot of sense. It also brings me to the third one. I want to skip down to this one where it says, any lesson you believe that is important for them to have, adapt the lesson to their passion. Don't diminish their passion into the lesson. So when you brought up things that they don't seem relevant to them to learn, but we might feel that they need to learn it, but we can teach it to them if we make it exciting by integrating their passion with it. Have you done that a lot? I guess you probably have. It's one of the core things of conscious parenting, I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the core element of passion-led education or self-directed education. A really interesting note here. As a parent, we sort of signed up to have a lot of our conditioning and our fear, especially our fear-based conditioning, bubble to the surface and to be looked at. So of course, when we're trying out new alternative modes to parenting, which vibe very nicely with Bashar's teaching, we're going to face our own shadow, if you will. So this happens in unschooling. So when our child, when we feel like we want to impose a lesson on our child and we want to do it in a certain way, we have to be very aware of our energy, the energy that we're coming from. Is there an element of fear here, which is tied very closely to obligation? It feels like obligation, like I should be teaching my child this. I'm afraid that if they don't learn this, they're not going to be capable and they're going to, all of these things, the stories that go through our head. Or is it coming from inspiration? Is it coming from passion? Wow, I'm so excited to bring this into my child's life. I can't wait to show them this. That's the difference there. I ask this to myself all the time. Now, of course, there's practical things we want our child to learn so that they don't hurt themselves. But I believe that we definitely can do this by following their instincts. Their passions are there for a reason. All they need to do is learn how to follow them. And we're there to sort of help them pick up the pieces along the way and put it together. And through that, they will learn what they need to learn, what they're being called to learn. We don't need to fear too much that if we don't impose, everything we can possibly think of that's ever humans have ever invented into their education style, that they're not going to turn out okay. Higher self has a much more divine plan than that. Mm-hmm. We don't need to overcompensate.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I don't remember probably 90% of my education in the public school system. Maybe unconsciously I do, but I don't use it. It wasn't relevant.
Right. And what's interesting about that, I'm sure everybody can remember when if you went to a traditional school, how it felt to have to learn things that were not relevant. It was boring, and if not outright damaging to your internal guidance system, because you're training yourself to not trust your instincts and instead to ignore them and just follow blindly an authority, and what an external authority. Mm-hmm. And we can also see how a lot of those things that we were pushing, and it's very, very hard to learn, right? It's harder to learn when you're not passionate. And we can see that when we push ourselves to do these things that our internal guidance system is saying, no, not right now, not the right thing at this moment, we don't even remember them. Like they might have been useless. So if that's a window that we can experience firsthand as parents to see, how this system works, it really does work, and we can trust it more in our kids there. Then.
Okay, I'm going to move on to talking about the second idea that Bashar shared about this.
Right.
To teach them that they are as powerful as they need to be to create whatever they need in life. It's so empowering, that statement. Do you have any thoughts about that?
You know what? I think Bashar sums it up quite well in that statement. Mm-hmm. But practically, I think that the best way to actually teach kids this lesson is to model it in your own life. So we have to look very closely at where we follow our obligation rather than our passion or inspiration, where we, might be afraid of doing what we really came here to do or want to do for our own reasons. And I believe our kids pick up on this energy, even if we're not communicating it verbally to them, they're picking up on this. So, practically in how to help our children learn this is just modeling it ourselves. Mm-hmm. I also think if anyone's had kids before, we can see how one of the very early stages of learning is learning to share or potentially taking something from someone else. These are all really great opportunities to just drop these seeds of wisdom to them without any expectation that they're going to pick it up or learn it right then, because it's definitely most likely beyond their developmental stage. However, if we just continue to drop the lines like what you just said, then it's going to be in their toolbox. And when they are ready to absorb that realization themselves, then they'll be like, well, mom used to say this, and they'll have something to fall back on.
Yeah, as a mother of a 21-year-old, I can definitely guarantee that well, at least that happened for my son. I'm like so rewarded by everything that I hinted at when he was growing up. It's finally, I can see it expressed in him now. Maybe it just meant to percolate in him over the years. But it's very rewarding to have an older son and who is able to express these concepts that I've made available to him as a young child, and didn't see any response many times, any reaction to them, but they were working in him.
Wow, that's so beautiful to hear. Yeah, and I think that it's those younger years that we have to really fine-tune our faith in children, because we start to see the results of our actions, I think, like you said, more when they're teenagers or in their 20s, when they're young, and we're like, is it working? Are we doing this right? So it's really a true test to how we can, I guess, recondition ourselves to have more faith in reality and faith in our higher self or our guidance system. Children will really bring that lesson strongly to parents of young children.
Yeah, I mean, I used to meditate around him when he was growing up, and just about a year ago or so, he started to meditate himself. He never showed an interest in it before, really, but he saw me doing it a lot. And just recently, I said, I'm going to go do a cryptic meditation. I'm going to go outside and meditate beside the stream. And then, like 2 weeks later, he's like, I want to meditate outside. I want to try that. I think that would be really fun. So it's just so nice to see, there's an idea that kids they want to take a new path than their parents a lot of times. And this is another interesting topic, how sometimes kids will rebel or, be their own person and want to do something totally different, which is fine. And each person is unique and different. And I guess there's a balance between being an example for them and just not expecting anything. This goes back to Bashar's teachings of no insistence on an outcome with anything. Like, you might wish something for your child, but that they would do this because it's benefited you a lot. But also remembering they have their own path, they have their own unique identity, and appreciating that, like my son's a jazz musician, and we don't have any jazz in our family. We're all music lovers, but none of it's jazz, so he's obsessed with it. It's what he's majoring in college. It's his passion. And so it's just such a beautiful gift to our family to have this new expression in our family, and it's unique. And I'm glad that I didn't, try to guide him into something that I preferred, because I never really liked jazz, but now I do, because I've been so exposed to it. So it's just it's a miraculous process of raising children and watching them grow up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really beautiful to hear. And I think it points to, some of even the more challenging things. Like, it's really easy when we see our kid picking up something that's beautiful, and even if it's different than what we are interested in, it's easier to accept that. It's harder to accept when we see our child doing something that we might view as negative or destructive. And of course, I'm not saying to not help them or attempt to help them. Yeah. But I think a huge part of parenting is, for example, my daughter went through a stage very young where she wanted to wear clothes that I deemed not exactly appropriate. And I'm like, what lesson are you doing right now? But I didn't, I had the urge to not shame her, but to be like, let's not do that. Let's go a different way. By letting her play out that phase that she was going through, she actually learned a lot of lessons at a very young age, the easy way. We talk about safe space. She didn't go through any hard lessons. It was just easy lessons of getting, accepting her body and all of these things at age 5, that maybe had I repressed that lesson, she could have gone through in a much more difficult way at age 15. So we have to be, higher self has a plan that even if our mind doesn't see very clearly what that plan is at the moment, sometimes we just have to fall to the trust and say, this is a phase, it's going to play out, and I'm here to help however I can, but I'm not here to tell you that this is wrong and that this shouldn't be. I think that's where it gets a little off. You're just missing the mark a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, my son went through video games was the thing that I wished he wouldn't do as much when he was growing up. But he was so passionate about it, and so he wanted to do it so much. So all I could do was provide rules, like in guidelines, for how long he could do it at my house. But he was from a split family, so he would also go to his father's house, who had a lot more relaxed rules, would let him play all the time, pretty much, over there. But I respected his fatherhood and allowed that to happen. But in my house, I set certain guidelines, and I feel like he grew out of that. He was able to explore it, and we were able to maintain a happy. I still consider us a family, even though we weren't living together. I'm friends with his father. We just had different values for raising a child, and so we decided to separate, but still have an equal parenting relationship together, which it was really a beautiful choice. I'm glad we did it. And but anyway, my son he's always been like really focused on one thing since a very young age. First it was Thomas the Tank Engine, and then it was Yu-Gi-Oh, and then Pokemon, and then it got into video games. And now for a long time, since middle school, I would say, like since I kind of found Bashar, like when he was 13, it's all been about music and jazz. So I'm glad I let him play through his obsessions in a way, like with the video games. It wasn't fragmenting his true self. He just had this focus of just wanting to explore something so precisely and focused. So I just let him do that within the guidelines I felt appropriate, without judging it negatively. And so I think that transferred over to his passion about trumpet. Now he practices 5 hours a day, and is always talking about jazz musicians, and he's even bringing in some money already from it, and just having a great time with this. So I love the transformation of his evolution.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, it brings a smile to my face. Yeah, and I think when you do that, you're giving your son such a gift, because he's learning, he's internalizing that he can trust himself. Like there's not another voice that's saying, "Oh, stop doing what you're doing," which it turns into our internal voice when we grow up, and then we have this disassociation. We learn to not trust our instincts because of a narrative that's been going on in our head. So that's probably why it was so easy for him to slip into jazz and being so consumed by it, because he did. Sorry about that. He was given the freedom to trust his instincts from a young age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I think that's very helpful, helping children to recognize what their passions are at a young age, to trust them and to not impose what we think they should be doing on them or anything, but just to observe them and allow those passions to blossom, whatever they may be. But we can provide guidelines and support if we feel, that there needs to be more of a balance with anything. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like one of those huge topics with unschooling. And I think video games is like the main example of that. Is, do we just let them play, or do we put some restrictions? Yeah. And you know what? I have to say, I think it comes down to the parent and what you are feeling is right in that moment. Mm-hmm. Because on some level, the child did choose this experience. So even if we make a mistake and we decide later, hey, you know what, I didn't actually want to give so many restrictions, and maybe I can adjust what I'm doing, or the other way around, it's okay. It's just like, trust what you're feeling and act that way. I know parents who don't give any restrictions, and their children are free to play electronics for as long as they want, stay up as late as they want, and they view that as, really letting the child explore. Mm-hmm. For my family, I have some requirements of what they need to get done before they play electronics, and sometimes they go days without playing because they don't want to do those things. But besides that, it's pretty free form on that. I mean, sometimes I notice that the energy is just getting so stagnant in the house. Like, it's like, wow, we've all been on electronics for a long time. Can we talk? Instead of imposing it in an authoritarian way, like, okay, guys, it's time to stop. It's like, hey, you guys notice that we've been on electronics for like 3 hours? You guys notice that? Maybe we should do something different. Maybe we should try something out. And it's much easier to like segue into something different.
Negative judgment, without the negative judgment, but more of a neutral, like, curiosity. What else is there to do, you know?
Right.
We could do something else that'd be exciting.
Right, totally. I think that's key there is, a lot of times we just act on the fear thoughts going through our head, and that's what really prompts us to be like, whoa, stop what you're doing, get off the electronics right now, or whatever it is. We're acting on that fear, where if we decided like, hey, this is not preferable, I actually don't want to be on electronics for 24 hours in a row, I want to do something different, we can act on inspiration instead. We can say, would you like to go to the park, and think of all these different ideas. And children are pretty apt to go along with you if they feel connected to you and not judge. So it's just a way to handle that in a positive direction.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I wanted to ask you about now, do your children, what is their perspective about extraterrestrials, and how did you share about that, about Bashar or other extraterrestrials? Do they have a certain set of belief systems about that?
That's a great question. So I actually, I have not imposed any of my beliefs onto my children, but I definitely expose them to my beliefs. But it's more as a conversation topic. What do you think about this? What does this make you think? And the philosophies of Bashar especially are brought up in our home. However, at this moment in time, I feel like my children are so interested in this physical reality that we find ourselves in right now, because it's new to them, that it's not exactly relevant yet for them to be interested in something like Bashar. We definitely, my kids know that I am open to the idea of aliens, and my daughter loves to sit around the dinner table and be like, Mom, let's talk about aliens again. But it's not imposed. It's not imposed at all. This is a very interesting topic, because I know that, for example, my son, he has no marks on his back except for one mark. There's this little splash of freckles right in the very center of his back. And it's the Orion star system, if you match it up to the picture. It's like, it was crazy. I noticed it one day. I was like, that looks familiar. And we matched it up to the picture. It's the Orion star system. Now, that would be a very easy opportunity for me to be like, well, maybe you're from the Orion, in another life, you're from the Orion belt. These sorts of conversations, something inside of me said, stop, wait, just wait. And I went to him and was like, look at this. What do you think this is? I'm like, look at this picture here. Do you think he's like, wow, it's different. I'm like, what do you think that means? He's like, I don't know. I was like, maybe before you go to bed, just ask yourself, right before you fall asleep, what could that mean? And sort of try to let the answer come through. And to this day, he hasn't come with, huge clarity on it. But I believe for a developing ego, like a young child, we don't want to plant too many ideas about their identity onto them, because this can be taken in a way that very quickly becomes ego, rather than like a way of like, how can I make this point more clear? Like, it's used as an identity that is less true than your true self at such a young age. So I think key is just listening to yourself, and if it feels right, if the opportunity feels like this is the moment to have this conversation, I would say go for it. In my life, that hasn't happened yet, particularly with my son. But I'm curious, what about you? Have you had these conversations with your son as well?
Well, I went through this phase where, how my son is so obsessed with trumpet and jazz. Well, I also kind of have that about Bashar and his teachings. So it wasn't something that I could really hold back. Like, it was just who I was. So I was always just talking about it, I wasn't trying to enforce anything on him, but I was just so excited about it that I would just talk to him about it. And he watched First Contact, the documentary, with me. He doesn't really watch the Bashar transmissions, but he could relate to the documentary. And he's like, maybe he's not really that excited about Bashar, but it seems like it's innate within him, like the formula. He does agree with the formula, and he is always about following his passion and everything like that. As far as the extraterrestrials and stuff like that, he doesn't care either way.
Right.
Really about. Yeah. So I don't really talk about that much with him anymore. When I was first getting into it, I guess I was just sharing a lot about it, and he wasn't excited about it, which was fine with me. He would just research his jazz and be with his jazz friends, and I would be with my Bashar friends online, which is, I think, that's great. We're both unique individuals, so.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree so much with that. Yeah. Same here. Like, I've mentioned it, and my son gave the idea that he was not ready for it, or if, it just wasn't relevant for him at the time. Like I mentioned something about, oh, do you believe in aliens? Do you think that there could be, just opening the conversation to have this. And at the time, he answered something like, no, aliens aren't real. Like, very certain. And I was like, well, that's debatable because of this and that. But it was just very clear in his energy field that it wasn't relevant for him yet. Like, whatever it is, his higher self, his personality, was like, I'm focusing on something different right now, and this is totally going to lead me to what I need to get to. Like, we don't need to worry and push our own beliefs. But like you said, like, just being yourself, and like, you're totally free to be yourself and to act on your passions. And if your passions include Bashar, I mean, go for it. Your kids are going to naturally pick up on that. And in fact, they're more likely to be aversive to it if we're pushing it. So
I've found ways to express my excitement in a way that he is more receptive to that, like with dreams. A big part of Bashar's teaching is about how this physical reality is a dream that we're in, and when we start to see it more as a dream, then we can start having more ability to create it in the way we want to. It's less solid, more flexible, and yet malleable, like a lucid dream. And so whenever I see my son, I always ask him, like, what are his dreams like lately? And I think that creates an environment, a dreamlike environment. And I ask his girlfriend what her dreams are like. She dreams a lot, and we have a really great conversation just discussing that and possible meanings. And now it's even going into, like, my father and my mother. We talk about our dreams together with them. And it's a really interesting conversation.
That's creative. I like that. I think I'm going to use that. And I think that there's so many portals into conversations like this, because I just think that the topics that Bashar brings up in the teachings, there's something about them that is just naturally interesting to people. Yeah. And whether people agree with the wrapper that they're in, meaning like the mode that they're delivered, whether you agree with channeling or whatever it is, the ideas and the lessons are fascinating. And so things like, hey, what is it to dream? And what if, our brain, like, we're proving that our perceptions are created by the brain, or at least it appears that way, which could lead to the fact that everything is a dream. These are just amazing portals into just asking the big questions without imposing our beliefs onto anybody. It's just asking questions and letting their wonder lead the way.
Yeah, it is, and just offering points of view. Like yesterday, we were talking about dreams. It was Easter, and we were all together, my mom and dad, and my son and his girlfriend. And my dad was saying, I wonder why I always dream that I'm in Europe and I'm seeing this wall on this farm and all these sheep and everything. It's a recurrent dream. And I said, well, maybe you have a strong connection to someone over there, and you're seeing through their eyes. Maybe it's, part of your oversoul, and you have a strong connection. And my dad was like, wow, I never thought of that. Like, he didn't even consider that. So that's kind of a way to share Bashar's teachings without laying a whole lot on someone at once. And it's just a suggestion. I didn't say that's what it was. That's right. Exactly. Yeah. He seemed to have wonder about it.
Oh, cool.
Anything about the hybrid children? Do you?
That's a great question. Um, you know, I actually don't know too much. I'm not like an expert on the hybrid children. I find a lot of my information on that through Bashar. I listen to him as the expert. But like I've learned as practical tools with my kids. It's sort of like what we mentioned before about just being very careful to how our ego can be tied to ideas like this, and helping to not have identities become us. And so with our children, a lot of times, I see in the spiritual community, but everywhere. But I think it's sort of like, you can call it old wine in new skins, where we bring the idea of an ego and an identity into the spiritual world, and suddenly we want to layer these labels onto our kids. And what we're doing there is I think we're valuing more. We want them to be something. We want them to appear a certain way, or be magnanimous, and all these great things, which is beautiful. But in a subtle way, we're setting the message that you aren't enough as you are. So there's a great possibility that the children in our life could be hybrid children, or they could be indigo, crystals, all these labels that we give. But I find it very important advice to give parents to make sure that we are valuing the everyday normal stuff, like loving the child when they're not perfect, and when they're stubbing their toe, or when they're spilling milk, and things like that. To know that's the portal into all of their greatness. If we truly want greatness from them, if we truly want them to live out these timelines and the reason why they came here, the portal is to accepting who you are now and accepting where you are now. And through that portal, it will come naturally. It's not something that we have to like impose on or anything like that. So I'm not sure if that fully answered the question, but that's...
It was a general question, like, what do you feel about the hybrid children? I love that. And actually, Bashar has said that there are different types of hybrid children, and the ones that he mostly talks about are not on Earth right now. They're going to be a lot more different than the ones that are here on Earth now. So
okay.
That's what Bashar's perspective. I think maybe some other channelers might have different perspectives about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, that's something that I was not aware of before now. I think I may have had a slightly wrong opinion about what he meant by hybrid children. but yeah.
Yeah.
There was something that Bashar said that was so interesting to me, and it was I'm going to butcher this quote right now because I don't have it in front of me, but it was something along the lines of learning to learn differently rather than just learning by memorization. We start to learn to more download information. So sort of like the Matrix, when you didn't have to like read and study and memorize for however long. You could just download that information. So this is something interesting, very interesting, when we start exploring the world of unschooling with our kids. So when we impose something that we think is the right way to learn something, which in our traditional school system has a lot to do with memorization, we are forcing the children to learn a certain way and to start to believe that that's the only way you can learn. The only way you can learn is by memorizing. What I've noticed, and many unschoolers can attest to this, is a lot of times, so the kids are just let to follow their passions in a safe space. And when they reach a certain age, whenever they're ready, a lot of them start to read. And you're like, how did you learn to read? Because I didn't see you studying. And they're like, you know what? I don't know. I can't explain it to you. But now I'm reading. And, there's a, I think she's 9 years old at my children's school, who is she's reading at a very high level. I don't know exactly what level it is, with no formal education. And I don't want to get too far outside of what is practical here. Like, I know that sometimes memorizing something can be useful. But I think in a large way, when we're passionate about something, we're following our intuition and our passions, then learning can be a combination of sort of memorizing and also downloading what you need in that moment. And children are a beautiful example of that. I've seen it with my kids. So.
Wow. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, Bashar knows what he needs to know when he needs to know it. So that sounds like what you're describing.
So have you noticed that, especially this generation of children, a lot of people are being labeled with ADD, ADHD, autism, things like this. And what's happening is those kids are not working with the school system at all. Like, there's no way, no amount of therapy that's going to make them work with the traditional school system. And I think this is a very beautiful thing that's happening. I think children are being called here to help reform the way that we view education. And the great way to do that is to say, this is absolutely not going to work for me. We have to rethink how we do this, because it's not going to work that I just sit down and am forced to focus on something that I have no interest in focusing on, which is the definition of ADD. So, yeah. So, I have a daughter who is 6 years old right now, who, if she went to traditional schooling, she would be labeled with ADD for sure. I sit down with her and I tried to teach her how to read as I teach the other kids. And it just does not stick. Like, in one ear, out the other. I could show the letter I on a paper like 1,000 times and then ask her, okay, what letter is that, after we've gone over it? And it's just not there. And my ego likes to strike up and be like, oh, there's a problem. This is the problem. We have to fix this. Mm-hmm. But when I got quiet and really asked myself, what's going on here? What's going on under the surface? That's the little voice that came in. And it was like, she is wanting to learn in a different way. This is not how she's wanting to learn. This is not even relevant for her right now. And when it is relevant, she's going to soak up this information through every pore of her body. It's going to be something that just, you're like a sponge and it comes in, rather than forcing to learn in a way that we deem the right way to learn. We could be very well clueless. So I remember you were saying that you said the idea that maybe it's this generation of children that are more apt to learning in this way, and I wholeheartedly agree, and I think we're seeing that firsthand with the kids that are coming here.
It's beautiful how you describe that, just because I see a lot of parents going through these challenges, and teachers, about this new way of learning that we're experiencing with the ADD. And it's just, if you see it from a whole systems perspective, it's like they are teaching us so much about how we can transform our way of making the information available to them, that they can, we have to be so creative now about teaching these and to really transform our systems. Yeah, it's really a beautiful thing. You have some of your children don't have that challenge, but your one daughter does. So, and to learn how to teach them together and to make that harmonious. And your other children are probably learning a lot from her, maybe. And maybe she's learning something. Yeah, so it's interesting that we put into a box, like, what is appropriate learning. I think this is one of the big lessons I've learned with my 6-year-old daughter that I was talking about. So she is, like, amazing at some other things. The girl she can scale a wall, and, like, she's very, very agile. Like, and she likes to tear things apart and put them back together, and all of these things. That's what she's interested in. And if I were to take what she's interested in and try to say, no, don't focus on that, come focus on the ABCs, because that's what we're supposed to be doing at this time, I would be robbing her of not only developing what her higher self or whatever is telling her to develop, but also I would be teaching her that she can't trust herself. And that will for sure become internalized, like we talked about earlier. Yeah. So. Wow. I noticed on your profile page, I went and visited that you're doing some public speaking, but I think what you have to share with your experience and everything would really be a help to schools and to other parents. I guess you are expressing this in different ways. You do public speaking and counseling, or? Yes. Yeah. So right now I'm offering one-on-one coaching. I started a Facebook group that's for free that you can join and get support from me, and also a group of other like-minded parents. I just started it. It's 3 weeks old, so it's in the beginning stages. Yeah, and I'm doing a little speaking. It's called Conscious Parenting Support Group on Facebook. Great. Yeah, maybe we can put the link for it in the comments or something. So yeah. Well, is there anything else you'd like to talk about? It's been a really enlightening conversation. Cool. Let me think for a second. You know what? I think that pretty much sums it up for now. Did you have any other questions? No. I do want to say one more thing, though. Like, the past 2 days, ever since we kind of scheduled this interview. I've been dreaming about children again.
Wow.
Yeah, because I don't really have any little kids in my life prominently. I have one that I see occasionally, but it's not like I'm not a big role for her or anything like that. So I really love to be connected to children through other people and whenever I see them. Um, so I'm very thankful that you spoke up and wanted to do this interview with me. It's a really
Oh,
great
awesome.
feeling. I feel more connected to my own inner child and just the kid energy in general.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you for putting the invitation out there, because I was so excited to reach an audience like Bashar's audience, because I think it's very in line with what Bashar talks about. And this was the opportunity. You put it up and I'm like, I've been asking for this. There it is. So thank you for everything that you do running that page. I mean, I've been following you for I don't even know how long, and it has helped me so much. You just never know how much a meme can help you. It's amazing. So thank you.
And I noticed a lot of other people who were on that thread about doing these interviews were also interested in talking about children and education. I don't know if you saw those other comments, but maybe you've connected with them. But it'd be nice to have a bigger network and to have your Facebook page grow and your group grow. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that we can help you express yourself a little more through this interview. So.
Thank you. Yeah, and if you ever want to collaborate on something within your group as well, I'd be open to it. I did notice that there was some interest from parents on there, so hey, it's a good sign. Yeah.
All right. Exciting. All right. Well, thank you very much, and I'll be in touch soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin. Bye.
Bye.